A very good afternoon and welcome back to the Analyst of Vajiram and Ravi. Today is 11th of December and here are the important articles presented before you. So the first article is a very important highlight of the day as Supreme Court today is set to deliver its verdict on the constitutional validity of the abrogation of Article 370 that provided special status to Jammu and Kashmir. So thereby we will be doing an in-depth analysis of Article 370 of the Indian Constitution. Then in the second one, we will read about freebies politics as a rush into freebies and its consequences have been highlighted by the Vice President of India in a meeting yesterday. Then in the third one, we will read about one of the most cleanest fuel available, that is green hydrogen, and what is the role played by photovoltaic cells in green hydrogen production. Then from prelims point of view, we will be doing a policy analysis of PM Vishwakarma Scheme, which has been recently launched in the month of September. And finally, we will wind up the discussion by reading about Universal Declaration on Human Rights as yesterday, that is 10th of December, was celebrated as Human Rights Day worldwide. So our first article of discussion is Article 370. The very important provision of the Constitution, which is responsible for according special status to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now we are reading about this because Supreme Court has been scheduled to deliver its verdict on the constitutional validity of the centre's decision, that is, decision or a legislation that was brought by a centre via presidential order in the year 2019. It has been 4 years since then and multiple petitions have been filed so as to examine the constitutional validity, and the verdict on that will be out today. So this becomes a very important article. Let's first understand the background of the evolution of Article 370 in the Constitution of India. So what happened? When India got independence via Indian Independence Act of 1947, when it was announced for the first time, the existing 562 princely states were told that you either join Pakistan or you either join India. All of them resorted to joining either India or Pakistan except for one state, that is Jammu and Kashmir. Raja Hari Singh of Jammu and Kashmir resorted that I will be independent, we will be an independent state. Until what happened in 22nd October 1947 when Pakistan, which was divided from India, it illegally invaded Kashmir. Now Raja rushed to Indian government to find its support and defense. So Indian government said that we will be providing you defense and support, but in return of one thing, and that thing would be your integration with India. So what was the demand? The integration. So Raja, because he desperately wanted to have security and defense, therefore he acceded to it. He acceded to the demands and he joined Instrument of Accession with the Indian government. Now what happens that finally the Instrument of Accession will be signed, but one blunder happens, that Instrument of Merger is not signed between Indian government and Jammu and Kashmir. So there are two instruments. Instrument of Accession accords or renders the external sovereignty of a state to the Indian government. So external sovereignty of Jammu Kashmir was given in the hand of Indian government by signing Instrument of Accession, but the internal sovereignty or the autonomy of the state was not given because Instrument of Merger was not signed between Indian government and the government of Jammu and Kashmir. So now what happens? The Constituent Assembly thought about giving special status. Why? Because Raja said that we want to retain our internal sovereignty, we want to retain our autonomy. So when the Constituent Assembly was formulated, while the chairperson of the drafting committee, that is B.R. Ambedkar, he was opposed to having a special status given to the state of Jammu Kashmir. It was Gopal Swami Iyengar who was given the responsibility that you shall be creating a draft of special provisions that have to be incorporated in the Indian Constitution. So while the Constitution was in the making process, it was on 17th of October 1949 when finally a special provision, that is Article 370, was incorporated officially in the Indian Constitution. Now, on 26 January 1950, when this Constitution will come into force, the special provision regarding Jammu Kashmir will also come into force. So, Constitution will be having two provisions regarding to Jammu and Kashmir. One is coming from Article 1, which says that Jammu and Kashmir is one among the states of the Indian territory. And second was the Article 370, which gave temporary provision for providing special status to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now what happened? In 1954, the first presidential order came. So actually it was written under the third clause of Article 370 that whatever changes have to be made in this particular Article 370, they have to be made by presidential orders with due concurrence from the Constituent Assembly. And now in 1954, a presidential order came because it was written in clause 3 of the Article 370 that whatever changes you want to make shall be made in the form of presidential orders that are having due concurrence from the Legislative Assembly or from the Constituent Assembly. So this particular or first ever presidential order was promulgated. It did two things. First of all, it called for creation of a new constitution, a separate state constitution for the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So a separate constitution was created. And second, it gave provision for Article 35A. Now this Article 35A is very important because it is one which provides for giving the status of permanent residence to the people of Jammu and Kashmir, who will be given preferential treatment, different rights and privileges as compared to the other citizens of India. So the permanent citizens have the following right. First of all, the land ownership right, only they have the right to have the lands in Kashmir. And second, that they were also given, they were entitled for the government jobs that the rest people of the India were not entitled to. So these two provisions came from the first ever presidential order. Now what happens in 1956, because the state constitution has been drafted, it will come into force. So when will the state constitution of Jammu and Kashmir come into force? In 1956. So I hope this scenario is clear. Now from 1956 to 1990s, a lot of turmoil will be seen in the valley because the militant activities will be going on, terrorism will be going on. In order to contain that, AFSPA, Armed Forces Special Powers Act, was imposed for the first time in 1990. Then in 2050, what happened? A coalition government formed in the Kashmir Valley, in the Jammu and Kashmir. This was a BJP and the PDP coalition. And finally, in 2016, Mehbooba Mufti was declared as the CM of Jammu and Kashmir. But then what happened? A fallout between this coalition happens, and in 2018, BJP decided to give away or to withdraw its coalition status. So now what happens? The fallout of the state machinery takes place. Now we know whenever fallout of the state machinery takes place, Article 365 is invoked in order to invoke the precedent rule. But since Indian constitution is not applicable in Jammu and Kashmir, so we will take up the Article 92 from the constitution of Jammu and Kashmir, which will say that if the state machinery fails, then precedent rule will be declared, and hence in 2018 presidential rule will be declared in the Jammu and Kashmir. Now, a lot of developmental challenges will be seen. For example, growth of militantism, growth of terrorism, and there was lack of infrastructure, lack of education. Everything was lacking, and also government policies could not effectively penetrate in the valley. Therefore, in order to do away with these, the presidential order number 2, which is the 2019 order, was promulgated. Now this order was promulgated, why? Because in the manifesto of the BJP government it was written that we will be abrogating article number 370, which is conferring special status to the Jammu and Kashmir people, but at the same time debilitating their development and growth. So in order to aid and facilitate development, what happened? Presidential order was given. The best part and the best tactic that was played by this order was that it completely superseded the 1954 order. Now see how beautifully it happens. Article 54 will say, the order 1954 will say that there will be a separate constitution and there will be Article 35A, which will be according special status to permanent residents. Now because I am superseding the previous or this particular presidential order, thereby I am taking away all these two legislations, all these two provisions. Therefore, just because of the promulgation of Presidential Order 2019, it superseded or did away with the provisions or the status that was the special status and the provisions that were accorded to Jammu and Kashmir. So now, ultimately, Article 35A will be abrogated and the constitution of the state will also be abrogated. Now, it also added clause 4 because this was one of the biggest reason of the going deadlock, because every time it was said that whenever you want to make a change in article number 370, you have to take a mandatory concurrence from the Constituent Assembly. But as we know that Constituent Assembly only existed from 1951 to 57. And after 57, who will act as the Constituent Assembly? There was a huge debate on that. So in order to clear the debate, this particular order made a change in the article 367. Why 367? Because this has the interpretation clause of the article 370. So under this, clause 4 was added, which said that Constituent Assembly instead means Legislative Assembly. So now you have to take the mandatory concurrence of the Legislative Assembly. And thereby, Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act was also promulgated, out of which 2 union territories was created, one with the state legislature, that is Jammu and Kashmir, and other Leh and Ladakh, which was without any legislative assembly. Now, let's quickly summarize about the different provisions of Article 370. There are 3 pointers you need to remember. First and foremost, that it is a part of Constitution. It was drafted by Gopal Swami Iyengar and it was incorporated into the Constitution ever since the conception of Constitution, that is from 26th of January 1950. It accords special status to Jammu and Kashmir and its resident. It exempted Jammu and Kashmir from the application of Constitution of India and gave rights to have its own constitution. Then it restricted the parliamentary's legislative power and stated that state government concurrence and the Constituent Assembly concurrence has to be taken in every legislation. Then only powers of defense, external affairs and communications were completely in the hand of central government, and now even if it has to incorporate any union list or any concurrent list, any provisions of these 2 lists, that is list number 1 and list number 3, then also it has to ask for the concurrence of the state legislative assembly. So that was the whole issue of the deadlock. Now, it also called for the provision of abrogation. What is the provision for removal of Article 370? So it said that we are giving you a clause number 3, according to which a presidential order would only, after the recommendation of the state constituent assembly, will be able to take up the matter of repealing the article and nobody else. So therefore, this particular process of law was followed, as we have seen in the previous slide. The third thing that you need to remember, that while special status was accorded, it was a temporary provision which was instilled in the part 21 of the Constitution, which deals with all the cases that are temporary, transitional and special in nature. Then Article 370 can thus be rightly called as the tunnel through which Constitution or Indian Constitution was applicable to Jammu and Kashmir. And this tunneling effect was stifling the development, therefore it was removed. Now finally, what were the policy implications of abrogation of Article 370? So first of all, special status was taken away. Now there will only be single citizenship, unlike dual citizenship that was before the promulgation of the presidential order. Then there will be only one flag, that is Tiranga. Minorities will be eligible for reservation who were deprived before this. All the Indians can buy and sell property in Jammu and Kashmir. Previously, it was only given to permanent residents. Then RTI will now be applicable. The audits of CAG will also be applicable, which was not applicable erstwhile or previously. Then assembly will be there for 5 years. Women will be given reservation. Children brought under RTE as per the rest of the country. For example, that is the right to education. So all these governmental provisions were now imposed or were now applicable to the extent of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, when this verdict will come, what will be the provisions that it will be changing? So first is the Article 370, which confers special status. Second is the Article 35A, which confers the status of permanent resident. Then reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir. Then the delimitation exercise that is ongoing in order to delimit the constituencies for both Lok Sabha, that is parliamentary, and the legislative. So both the limitations will also be affected. Then it interestingly also deals with the voting rights that are given to the West Pakistan refugees. So West Pakistan refugees were essentially the Muslim refugees which came to, the Hindu refugees which came to India in 1947. So these people when migrated, though they were conferred the status of citizen of India, they were allowed to vote in any election including parliament, but they were not accorded the status of permanent resident in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. and therefore they were not able to vote in their own state legislations. So therefore, they made a protest, and as a result, this particular presidential order of 2019 gave them the voter right and they gave them a uniform citizenship in the state of Jammu and Kashmir as well. So it will be having some consequences on their voting rights as well, but which also has been challenged. Now, finally, what are the impacts of removal of the removal of special status in Jammu and Kashmir? First and foremost, it was observed that ever since 2019, there has been rapid decline in the amount of stone pelting incidents and the militant activities. You can observe it from the table that the total amount of terrorist activities in the last 5 years have gone down to below 32%. Death of civilians down to 14%. Death of security personnel down to 52%, which is a huge feat. And the admission of terrorists has also gone down to 14%. So this is the impact. This is the security related impact of Article 370 abrogation. Then some political reforms as well, because it penetrated democracy deep inside the root. It strengthened the root of the democracy. How? By first of all calling for the first ever District Development Council election in the year 2020, which also resulted in a 50% more voter turnout. As a result, many people participated and it boosted the democratic decentralization in a very underrepresented valley, in a very underrepresented state. Also, it amended the Jammu Kashmir Panchayati Raj Act, which provided for certain provisions of reservation for the minority communities and the deprived sections, including women. It also provided for representation of hilly people via formation of a hill council of Kargil. Now, it also accelerated and boosted the infrastructure by creating Jozila Tunnel, Leh Airport and fiber optics cables, especially in the Ladakh region, which has been heavily underdeveloped. Then it also provided for social benefits because it started penetrating the government schemes. For example, Ayushman Bharat could find its way. There was setting up of many hospitals just like AIIMS, central universities, technical education institutes, etc. All were finding its way now in the Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh region. And finally, the education was also ramped up as a national skill training institute in Ladakh was set up. It also led to training of more than 75,000 youth across the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So, the verdict today will be having the following aspects. We will now see what are the arguments from the petitioner's side who are against the abrogation of Article 370, that is special status, and we will also see what are the arguments given by the centre. So, the first and foremost argument said by the petitioner is that this particular article, Article 370, is no more a temporary provision. It has been wrongfully put in the wrong section, wrong part of the Indian Constitution. Rather, it has become permanent. Why? Because it was written in its clause that it will be governed according to the mandate or according to the concurrence of the Constituent Assembly. Since Constituent Assembly has ceased to exist after 1957, so therefore, any chances of abrogating it has also ceased. You cannot abrogate it. Now it has become a mandatory, a permanent provision. The second interpretation is that they said that while there was an instrument of accession, that is, giving up of external security by the state, but there was no merger agreement, no instrument of merger. Therefore, the internal sovereignty or the autonomy of the state is still retained with the state. Next, petitioners argue that the concurrence of Jammu and Kashmir government was not taken, which was explicitly mentioned in multiple clauses of the Article 370. So you can read it from there. Concurrence in all these laws were not taken. Then what is the contention? What are the arguments from the centre? Centre says that we have actually followed the due process of law. You have said that presidential order will be able to change any provision of the constitution. We have done that. Second, you have said that it has to do via concurrence of the Constituent Assembly. So we have changed the meaning of Constituent Assembly to Legislative Assembly. With that, we have followed the due process of law. Second, this constitution is also present, this part is also present in the 21st part of the constitution, which ultimately has only those provisions which are temporary in nature. So it is actually a temporary provision. Next, sovereignty was surrendered. That is, internal sovereignty should not be confused with autonomy. Yes, we are giving you the autonomy, doesn't mean that the state will demand for internal sovereignty. So the interpretation of internal sovereignty is also cancelled out by the centre. Next, Karan Singh's proclamation. Karan Singh, who was the son of Raja Hari Singh, he said explicitly that Constitution of India that will be framed by the Constituent Assembly shall shall be applicable in its entirety to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. It will also govern the constitutional relationship between the state and the contemplated Union of India. For your kind information, before this, it was Act of Government of India Act 1935, which was demonstrating or governing the relationship between the Union government and the state of Jammu and Kashmir. But now it will be the Constitution of India. So thereby, even Karan Singh said that the entire sovereignty or the supremacy of the Constitution of India will be acknowledged in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So it also lessens the scope of any confusion as to whether this particular section can be changed or this particular constitutional amendment can be made or can be taken away or not. So this was about Article 370 discussion. Now coming to freebie politics. So freebie politics, because it has been highlighted by the Vice President that we need to empower the human minds and resources and not their pockets. So what is the means of empowering human mind and resources? By providing them skill development, by providing them certain important infrastructure that can have multiplier effect, by leading to economic growth, or by creating some other policy measures which will give them healthcare, social welfare, economic welfare, etc. So our focus should not be to fill the pockets, but the human minds and the resources. How freebie plays a role in this, let's understand that. First of all, what are freebies? So freebies are nothing but a welfare measure. So welfare measure, if you take as a larger set, it would contain of some policy measures like some governmental schemes that are long thought upon. Then it will contain some of the infrastructural measures. It will contain certain grievance or e-governance mechanisms, grievance redressal mechanisms, citizen charters, etc. It will contain some other things including providing of goods and services, public goods and services that are free of cost. So to simply put it, what is a freebie? Freebie is a public good that is available to you at a heavily subsidized rate, or rather at a free of cost rate. RBI in its research paper published in the Bulletin of 2022 defines freebie as a public welfare measure that is provided free of charge. It also distinguishes between a public welfare measure and a freebie by saying that freebies are short term and they give you narrow benefit. Now, how do you define public welfare? Public welfare is a long thought upon, researched upon policy intervention that gives sanctity or takes its sanctity from the directive principle that is to cause the socio-economic growth of the country and having long-term impacts on the production and productivity. For example, developing the infrastructure, developing roadways, railways, transports, etc. that will be further giving a boost to the economy. So it doesn't just cater to the present generation but also the future generations to come, hundreds of generations to come. So therefore, this has a much more long-term effect and it also leads to a boost in the economic growth. Whereas this particular welfare measure is not only short-term but also short-sighted. It yes benefits this particular generation for only one fiscal year probably, but at the same time it causes huge economic burden on the public exchequer because of the huge cost of it and also the recurrent cost of it. So this doesn't have multiplier effect, whereas a typical welfare scheme would have a large multiplier effect. So now what exactly accounts of freebies? Freebies are any kind of waiver or anything that is given to you for free. For example, electricity or food grains or fertilizers or any subsidies given on the same. Now these freebies have great concern associated with them and that is why they are also known as double-edged sword in the name of welfare scheme. What are the concerns? See, first of all, it causes heavy expenditure burden on the government. Therefore, it also increases their debt burden. Debt burden increases so much so that it is observed in the case of Punjab that 16% of its revenue is given only to feed of the electricity subsidy that has been promised by the government. And this is basically to raise the green revolution belt of Punjab. It has also got certain environmental implications. So environmental implications are such that the groundwater level has declined to up to 161% in the green revolution belt, especially in Punjab, as compared to the national average of 61%. So the water crisis is also augmenting in such regions. Next, it is also against constitutional principles. See, if you do not have the capacity to fulfill your promises, these are your promises and this is your performance level. This is the revenue generated and these are the expenditure that have been promised. Then you will definitely be failing on to meet your promises, and failing on to meet your promises or delivering false promises also violates the fundamental right of the citizens. So it also is against a constitutional principle. Second, now where will this excess expenditure come from? Because revenue is not enough, it is shortfall. So this excess expenditure will come from the debt that this government will be taking from another country or from another sector. Therefore, it also raises the overall debt burden or constricts the fiscal space of the state. Therefore, it also fails to fulfill its FRBM targets of limiting fiscal deficit to 3% and also limiting its debt to GDP ratio in the case of state down to 20%. It also fails doing this. Then there is also opportunity cost associated with it. See, because resources and time are limited, if you decide to allocate it on one thing, it will be compromised from the other sectors. For example, if somebody is sitting here and watching Netflix instead of reading current affairs, then what will be the opportunity cost? Yes, he will be getting the entertainment, but he will miss out on the daily current affair. That is the opportunity cost. Similarly, if the government is taking the revenue that it has in providing things for free of cost, that too with a short-term gain, then it will also compromise with other areas of the welfare program. For example, developing infrastructure projects or giving healthcare facilities, etc. Then there are grave environmental concerns which we have already discussed. The worst thing is that there are certain challenges at institutional level which also helps to propose or promote these freebie culture. What are these challenges? First of all, the lack of regulatory power given with the ECI Election Commission of India. Then there is no assessment of the financial viability of these populist policy, that where is the money coming from, what is the source, and is it even viable to announce such a promise or not. Then lack of information to the voters, because we as voters are not inquisitive. We are not asking, we are not demanding about the financial prudence, that where will this money come from. So actually, in order to make you aware about this, a question on UPSC was asked in the prelims examination, that if a commodity is provided free of cost to the public by the government, then who bears the opportunity cost? Is it zero? No. Is it ignored? No. Rather, that opportunity cost is finally transferred to the tax-paying public only. So whatever free you are getting ultimately will be recovered from somebody else's pocket only, who is a tax-paying public. So therefore, we need to be mindful of the challenges of freebie culture so that we do not get lured by the proposals of political parties. What is the way forward here? First of all, we need to strengthen the model code of conduct. How can we do this? By strengthening the Election Commission of India, who is responsible for conducting free and fair elections in the nation, which will also make sure that there are stringent reforms like model manifestos created by ECI, which every political party has to adhere to. Then voter awareness needs to be there. We as a citizen need to know what is the difference between a welfare scheme and a freebie scheme. So once we are aware about this, we will not get lured. Next, the role of Financial Commission needs to be strengthened. Financial Commission needs to assess whether the state economy can sustain this level of financial burden or not, and also take into account the debt burden level of the state who has announced the freebie, taking into consideration its financial allocation, that which is the role of Financial Commission. So by doing some of these little way forwards, we can ensure that the freebie culture or the Revdi culture that we know as will also be minimized in Indian economy and in Indian politics. Next, we will read about green hydrogen and photovoltaic cell. So what is the news here? In order to achieve the decarbonization goals, certain exemptions have been proposed for green hydrogen developers to meet the national production target. National production target of renewable energy and also of green hydrogen. What are these targets? We will be reading in the further slides. Certain exemption, for example, the import of photovoltaic cells from China is allowed and subsidized till the year 2035 in order to give a boost to the production of green hydrogen. What is green hydrogen and what is its importance? So hydrogen, as we know, is one of the most prevalent fuel, freely available fuel, but also requires good amount of technology to harness it. At the same time, this is the most efficient fuel. Also, this is the most cleanest fuel because it doesn't lead to emission of greenhouse gases or any polluting gases. Now, what are different types of hydrogen? That depends on two things. First of all, what is the input which is needed to create it? Input in the form of a fuel, because the combustion of fuel will lead to emergence or creation of hydrogen as a byproduct. And second, the kind of energy we are using. So fuel and energy would be two inputs, and on the basis of this, we will classify the different types of hydrogen. And second aspect is where is the released other byproducts are emitted, or where they are sequestered or stored. If they are released into the atmosphere, for example, carbon dioxide is a byproduct of this reaction. If it is released into the atmosphere, it will again increase the greenhouse gas emissions. If it is stored or sequestered by a CCUS technique, then this will be called as a greener method, a more greener method of sequestering, or more greener method of creating the hydrogen. So on the basis of this, we have divided hydrogen into following colors. So for example, if you're taking input of a fossil fuel, for example, coal, the most polluting one, when you will perform oxidation of this, or when you will burn in the presence of oxygen, it will lead to carbon dioxide and hydrogen. Yes, we need the hydrogen, it has been created, but what about the carbon dioxide? And what about the other gases like sulfur dioxide, and for example nitrous oxide, etc., which are also polluting in nature? So therefore this is known as black hydrogen or brown hydrogen, because they are polluting in nature, they are bad in nature. The next process is creating it from natural gas. Now natural gas only has pure methane, so when you oxidize it, at that time you will get carbon monoxide and you will get hydrogen gas. Now carbon monoxide is less polluting and less harmful as compared to the other greenhouse gases or other polluting gases. So this is a more greener form. Therefore such a hydrogen is known as grey hydrogen or turquoise hydrogen. Turquoise hydrogen is when pyrolysis is done. Pyrolysis is done when this methane is went under steam gas reforming, that is exposed with steam, that is water, and as a result you get carbon monoxide and you get hydrogen gas. This is again a less polluting resultant. Now when we talk about the above greener or the above alternatives, here we perform electrolysis. Electrolysis of what? Of water only. So here we are not taking into consideration of any hydrocarbon. So what we are doing? We are doing hydrolysis of water in the presence of an energy which is also renewable in nature. So for example, solar energy, which is driven by the photovoltaic cell. So now do you understand the correlation between two, which will give you hydrogen and oxygen gas, and both of them are not polluting, they are not greenhouse gases. So therefore this will be the greenest form of hydrogen. Therefore it is known as green hydrogen. One that is created from an energy derived from nuclear fuel is known as pink hydrogen, and one that is derived from a grid energy, a mixed energy, is known as a yellow hydrogen. Okay, so once we have understood about green hydrogen, you also need to know about one fact, that India's first 99.99% pure green hydrogen plant has been created in the Dulaijan district of Assam. So please be aware of that. Then what are the benefits of it? Benefits, as you can see from the emission of this result of this formula, that it is environmental friendly because there are no emissions, neither polluting emissions, neither greenhouse gas emissions. Also, it also helps in achieving energy independence for India. Why? Because we will not be resorting to fossil fuel now. Second, it will also help us to gain carbon neutrality. Then it will also help us to have decentralization. Why? Because most of the energy that is renewable is mostly deployed in the rural areas. And in the rural areas, when you will bring down the energy security over there, you will decentralize the energy sector also. Then the National Hydrogen Mission, it says that total 5 million ton of hydrogen has to be created, or power has to be created by 2030. And in order to fulfill that, we need an additional 125 gigawatt of energy or green hydrogen. Now, what are the challenges with green hydrogen? First of all, this particular mission misinterprets hydrogen. Hydrogen, as we know, needs to be fueled from an energy which is completely renewable. But India has got its own limitations. So India sees in its policy that hydrogen produced in a way that emits no more than 2 kg of carbon dioxide per kg of such hydrogen will be considered as a green hydrogen for us. So it also has some emissions linked with it. It is not emission free, still it is classified as green hydrogen, but it is actually not. Then there are certain environmental impact. Now in order to have renewable energy plants, solar fields, etc., you would be requiring huge amount of land areas for renewable energy construction. You will also be requiring a lot of amount of water for the electrolysis process, and this will compromise both food security and water security in our nation. So this was about green hydrogen. Now let's come into photovoltaic cell. The reason why we are reading this is because UPSC has asked a question. Let's straight away go into the question that regarding solar power production, which of the following are correct? First statement, that photovoltaic is a technology that generates electricity by direct conversion of light into electricity, while solar thermal is a technology that utilizes the sun's rays to generate heat, which is further used in electricity generation process. So you let me know whether this statement is correct or not. Photovoltaic cell, essentially what happens, it takes use of semiconductor, P and N part. Here the PN junction gets created. So whenever a sunlight strikes it, sunlight excites the electron and therefore development of a potential takes place, and this potential leads to drive of electricity or creation of electricity between them. So here what we are doing, we are converting the thermal energy into potential energy. So here this is about the photovoltaic cell. Now in the case of India, what can be seen that the production rate has gone up to 50 gigawatt in 2020. Back in 2010, we only had 10 gigawatt of energy from the solar volts or from the solar photovoltaic cells. You also need to know that out of the total renewable energy target for India, that is the 500 gigawatt as we have committed in the Panchamrit principle COP26, about 280 will be met from photovoltaic cell only. That is the importance over here. Now let's also come back to the PYQ and analyze second statement that they generate AC current while solar thermal generate DC current. This is absolutely wrong because both of them create DC current. Next, India has been a manufacturing base for solar thermal technology but not for photovoltaics. Again, this statement is also incorrect because India though has no manufacturing capacity for two things. First of all, the solar wafers and the polysilicon ingots, which we essentially import from China, but still there is one power plant we have, that is the Maharishi solar power plant, and it also creates these solar wafers and polysilicon ingots. And currently India imports 100% of its silicon wafer from China, that we have already read, and around 80% of the total PV cells are also imported from China. So we have got huge dependence on China, and one such question was also asked in the year 2011. Now let's talk about the PM Vishwakarma scheme. So it has been launched by central government on September 17, and it has received over 21 lakh application in 2.5 months. That has been the success. What is this scheme? So first of all, it talks about Vishwakarma. Vishwakarma, as we know, is a deity in Hindu mythology who is considered as the chief artisan or architect of not only the earth, heaven, but also hell. So Vishwakarma is basically the chief deity who has not only created mythological cities like Lanka, Indraprastha, Dwarka, etc., but has also created the Vajra of Indra. So Vishwakarma is celebrated by a community, a social group, and the descendants of Vishwakarma are known as the Vishwakarma community. So they are here, basically we are talking about artisans, the artisans and the craftsmen of the India. So we have talked about what is Vishwakarma community. Now what is the scheme all about? The scheme is basically to provide skill development and hand-holding support to these artisans and craftsmen of the India so that we can provide them economic leverage. Now this is a tri-ministerial effort. Please note down that it is an effort of not just skill development ministry but also MSME, which is the nodal ministry of this particular scheme, and it is also supported by Department of Financial Services from Ministry of Finance. So it is a tri-ministerial effort. It was launched in 2023, 17th of September. It is completely central sponsored. So this is central sector scheme with an outlay of 13,000 crore. It will be working for 5 years till 2028. And the idea is to strengthen their heritage, their culture of Guru Shishya Parampara, so that they take up their skill training as well as impart their skill training so that we'll be able to preserve their culture of artisanship and craftsmanship. What are the benefits that government is providing? First of all, the training to these people so that they can update and they can integrate themselves with the global value chain. So first of all, training. Second is their recognition. They will be provided an ID card. Those who are trained by Vishwakarma scheme will also be given certificates. Then they will also be given some financial support in the form of credits. Credits will be given in the form of two tranches. The first tranche, you will be getting 1 lakh rupees, and in the second one, you will be getting 2 lakh with a concessional interest rate of just 5%. Now there will also be an incentive to purchase toolkit so that they can perform more efficient products and they can produce more efficient products. Then incentive for digital transactions will be there, and therefore there is involvement of Ministry of Finance, Department of Financial Services. Also, marketing support will be provided so that they will integrate with the global value chain. So this was about PM Vishwakarma scheme. Now in the last we will talk about Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now December 10th has marked the 75th anniversary of this particular declaration. This declaration which happened in Paris, and it happened 75 years ago, which means on 10th of December 1948. You must also need to know about Paris Principles, which are not associated with this declaration but the 1991 Declaration of Human Rights, which gave 6 total overall principles regarding human rights only. Now, this particular declaration, as we know, it is a document. So this is a document which contains of preamble and 30 articles. These articles are talking about multiple rights, the social right, cultural right, freedom right, etc. of all the people, of all the citizens and all the people who are getting it just on the virtue of them being a human. So therefore they are considered as human rights. They are also universal in nature because you will be getting it regardless of your race, color, sex, nationality, etc. It is not a legal binding treaty. You must remember this because this question can be asked. This statement can be made in UPSC to confuse you. But at the same time, it is a guiding light for all the other national laws. For example, the LGBTQ laws in the world. For example, the anti-apartheid regime and the laws in Africa. All of this is basically inspired by this Universal Declaration of Human Rights only. What are some of these human rights? These are no one has the right to hold you in slavery. Then no one has the right to torture you. Then you have the right to be recognized everywhere as a person before the law. Then everyone has the right to a nationality. No one would be without any nation. No, we can take away any of your rights. This is also one of the provisions. Then everyone has the right to have adequate standard of living for themselves and their family. People should have the freedom of right, sleep, expression, etc. So these are some of the human rights. You can have a look from the handout which you can download from the description box. One more thing from prelims point of view is that what are the human right laws that are ratified by India and which are not ratified. So the first one, third one, the first, second, third and fourth one, all of them have been ratified by India along with the Paris Principles and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, except for the Refugee Convention of 1951. India has not signed this particular convention, so please be mindful of this fact as well. So this was all about today's discussion. I hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.